All right. Returning from our break. You know, it's so important that each of us, each one listening to this program, identifies, recognizes, and understands their role and position as a leader, by choice or otherwise, or by default. The simple fact is that, you know, in the beginning of an early movement, everyone who is involved is a leader. It's just the nature of how things operate. Everyone is a minister of liberty and freedom. And it's your job and your obligation to go out there and spread the word, to proselytize, to preach and teach and educate those around you. I covered this yesterday with two programs that were geared and related towards why leaders are whom they are and how you can improve your leadership skills. I got a lot of very, very positive feedback on it. I got a lot of email on it. There were quite a few comments on YouTube and such. And, you know, I think that before we consider ourselves to just be a cog in the wheel, we might want to recognize and be aware of the fact that we are actually the cog. That we are not just a tooth on the cog. And in some cases, you know, we might even be the wheel. Because I don't think you realize how deep and how far the influence is that you bear. And not knowing that, you may not necessarily be aware of the importance of the role that you play in the overall scheme of things. I mean, take a watch, for example. And if you take one tooth off of one cog in a very complex system, in a spiral array of machined parts that function to keep that watch in time, the entire thing comes to a grinding, screeching halt. And think of yourself no differently. You may be a tooth on the cog in the overall picture, but your loss is critical to the movement of the watch, the movement of liberty, the movement of freedom. And as such, you have an obligation to have an impact and influence on those around you. So I encourage you to please pay attention to how and what and where and how, you know, who you're talking with, how you're speaking with them. Please make sure that you go back and check those YouTube programs for some encouragement, some knowledge, some inside ideas about how you can improve your skills as a leader. And start by working at it and immediately practice. You know, I don't care if you get up and you practice in front of a few friends and tell them what you're doing and then ask them to critique you and work with you about it. Do it with your family. Do it with your church. Do it with an organization that you're a member of. If you're a member of a VFW hall or you're a member of a church or a civic organization or the Elks Club or whatever it is that you're a part of, ask those people that are closest to you to work with you and help you, to critique you and challenge you to push outside the envelope, your boundary, your level of comfort, your comfort zone, because that's how you grow. And if you flub it, you're in front of friends, and it doesn't really matter so much, right? So the goal, of course, is that we hone and sharpen our skills. You know, when you sharpen a knife, you don't sharpen a knife by butter. You don't sharpen a knife with plastic. You sharpen a knife by using steel against steel. And so I encourage you to find like-minded individuals that you can sharpen your skills with while you are simultaneously learning your own boundaries, your own limitations, and your own capabilities. I think you'd be surprised at how good you could be and how well you can speak and how appropriately you can bring articulate answers to the table as, when, and where, and if need be, based on input. And ask them to play devil's advocate, if you will, right? I mean, if you're going to sit there and talk with a group of friends and say, listen, you know, each of us should be learning this. And by the way, they should be learning from your actions and then practicing themselves. We all have an obligation to learn and educate ourselves. And then with that education and that knowledge and wisdom, we have an obligation to share it with others. And you know what? You won't reach all people all the time. Many, many, many will walk away. Be prepared early on for rejection. And don't be afraid of that. Just know that you can't save every soul. You can't take every horse and lead it to water and it's successfully going to drink. You can show them where the water is. If they don't drink, that's on them. But know that it's your role to get them to the water. The Fast and Furious situation, and I want to make sure we address that today, because there have been some revelations about 3 new and additional Fast and Furious weapons that appeared at various Mexican crime scenes. And, the press, of course, is kind of keeping this under wraps. They really don't want you to know what the real truth is. But, even though we're surrounded by a vast deluge of scandals in this administration, I don't think we want to ignore one of the first ones that broke the scene, right? And that was Operation Fast and Furious. Now, Eric Holder was flooding, the cartels with illegal weaponry, with the willful knowledge and intent that what it was really designed to do was to anger America to the point where, it was the Hegelian dialectic, right? Create a crisis, and then when the screaming reaches a crescendo, offer them a solution that invariably, eliminates their individual right. So the case in point here was very simple. Hand a ton of weapons off to the Mexicans, let them start using them, and then once those weapons are used, the American population will begin screaming bloody murder, and then the government will step in with a prearranged, predefined solution. Trim and limit the Second Amendment, or completely obsolete it, or get a groundswell of support for the UN Small Arms Treaty, which was just around the corner, if you recall. Now, we also know that Eric Holder has lied to America significantly and consistently, and we do know that he is now been both civilly and criminally held in contempt by Congress. And yet, for whatever reason, no one seems to care. I mean, here is the Attorney General, the highest law enforcement officer in the land, who is, for all intents and purposes, been accused of a crime, and no one seems to care. It's beyond my comprehension to think that Americans in vast numbers just don't give a darn. That the one guy whose job it is to institute law and order in the United States is himself a criminal responsible for murder. Maybe not directly, he didn't pull the trigger. But, the prisons are full of people that are in jail for conspiracy because they played a small role in a crime. So let me give you some examples. If you are knowledgeable that someone's going to commit a crime and you don't stop it, you can go to prison for that. It's called an accessory. If you were driving the car that was later determined to be the getaway car in a bank heist, even if you didn't know the person had robbed the bank, you will go to prison for being complicit in the conspiracy of robbing the bank. And, the federal government has law, and I say that with great chagrin and sarcasm because it's not really law, that people are in jail for conspiring to commit a crime. In other words, the crime was never even committed, they just discussed it. Now here you got a guy who not only discussed it, but actively planned it and then committed it. And the whole world doesn't seem to give a damn. I mean, we've got dead Americans, hundreds upon hundreds of dead Mexicans, and nobody cares. The press is all too willing to sweep it all up underneath the rug. The Ministry of Propaganda is hard at work deflecting, hiding, misdirecting all of these stories and information from you. Hundreds of Mexicans have died from bullets that were fired from Eric Holder's guns. And America just doesn't seem to care. 4 years later, we don't have answers. 4 years later, Congress can't get by subpoena the records it requires. 4 years later, guns are still showing up at violent crime scenes in Mexico. Earlier this year, one of the Fast and Furious guns that was used to kill a Mexican police chief and his bodyguard, by the way. So it was a double murder with a Fast and Furious gun. Why is it that Eric Holder is walking around in a suit instead of a jumpsuit? An orange one. I mean, you got to wonder. And Cheryl Atkinson, she's from CBS News. She is the one who is such a good investigative reporter that even CBS News doesn't like her because that's against their political agenda. But she has, they'd have a hard time, getting rid of her, but because she's so successful at what she does. But she is the one who has been constantly keeping this in the forefront of the news, even when, so many other news organizations refuse to. The Justice Department tracing documents that have been obtained by CBS News, and of course everything has to be done under a Freedom of Information Act, which means you're actually filing a court order on the government subpoenaing documents. Why do we have to do this? Is this really what America intends? We have to file a subpoena to find out any kind of information, and half of them are rejected because they violate national security. I mean, how is everything a secret now? According to the Justice Department, the tracing documents turned up 3 guns, 2 rifles. They were 7.62 by 39 AK type rifles, and they were purchased by a Fast and Furious suspect who was later charged. And I'm sorry, actually, I think that guy wasn't actually charged. And then there was another guy who was actually convicted, and he purchased a third. Now, and of course, nobody wants to talk about the fact that the ATF, who was involved in this, not only actively allowed these guys to buy guns, knowing that they were prohibited and knowing what they were doing with them, they encouraged the stores to let this happen, telling them, well, we'll give you the political cover necessary later. I got to tell you, when the government commits the crime so that they can catch another criminal, or in this case, they didn't want to catch any criminal. They wanted to use this as the catalyst to create a anti-gun sentiment in the United States that would encourage Americans to say, you're right, we've had enough of this, let's repeal the Second Amendment. Guys, that's criminal. It's criminal in its intent. It's criminal in its conspiratorial format of even thinking or planning that. It's criminal in its activation. It's criminal in its implication of forcing, by threat and coercion, legal dealers to participate in your illegal activity as a government agency. Does anybody not see that? I mean, to me, it's incomprehensible that that's the way that our government is operating. The House has been trying to investigate. Holder has stonewalled every attempt. The president has given him executive privilege. For the first time in history, executive privilege has been given to someone not within the immediate White House circle of influence, and in a completely separate division, and on top of that, for the purposes of protecting the administration's own guilt and complicit involvement. I mean, guys, this is so lawless. It's amazing to me that, that the peasants aren't storming the castle with pitchforks and torches, demanding that the monster be sent out. I'm just stunned by it. He should have been fired, and he should have been charged criminally. He's being held in both civil and criminal contempt. Now, I want you to hear the second phrase, criminal contempt. That means it's not a matter of evidence for a lawsuit, it's a matter of evidence that can involve prison time. And yet that's where the investigation stops? You see, one of the reasons we don't have an investigation going on in other areas of corruption, like the IRS, like the NSA, like the Benghazi incidents, is this. When Congress appoints a special prosecutor, they request the special prosecutor from whom? If you don't know the way this operates, the path that a request for a special prosecutor from Congress takes, you're going to be stunned to find this out. They have to request the special prosecutor from the Department of Justice. That's the only method by which they can obtain one. And here's the problem. Guess who gets to appoint the special prosecutor on a personal level? You guessed it, Eric Holder. So they can't get here is the scene. Eric Holder, let's say Congress says, okay, we've had enough of this, obfuscation and gamesmanship. We've had enough. We want a special prosecutor. Mr. Holder, we want a special prosecutor to investigate Mr. Eric Holder. Now, how objective do you think that prosecutor's going to be? I mean, you're talking about criminal jail time for the lead law enforcement officer in the nation. So I ask you, how objective is that prosecutor going to be? How fast is he going to work? How accurately is he going to identify the guilt of this particular individual? How far up the ladder is he going to go before he's warned off? There's just no way we can expect a fair and objective review and investigation of Eric Holder, of the FBI, of the NSA, of the IRS, because each of these scandals is actually the brainchild of Eric Holder's boss and Eric Holder himself. Now, I'm not pointing the NSA at him, although he's got a significant role to play. You see, the NSA, Eric Holder should, and were he a proper attorney general, he'd be filing against the NSA to protect Americans from what they're doing, but he won't because he's a part of it. He's complicit. He is himself one of the conspirators. So, if you go to the Don, the Godfather, and you tell him, we're police, and we have been looking at your operation, and we've decided that you're a criminal enterprise. And so we want you to appoint one of your top lieutenants to investigate you and report back to us. What kind of a report do you think you're going to get back? Is it going to exonerate the Don? Is it going to exonerate the family? Is it going to clear them and clear La Familia? Of course it is. I mean, human nature is still human nature, folks. And the wheels of corruption are the wheels of corruption, irrespective of who's involved. You see, the hypocrisy of this entire thing, and it's so deep at this point, that's why you've heard me say that we are beyond salvage politically. Because in order for politics to work, you have to have men and women of moral and ethical integrity, and we don't have that. They are corrupt, they are coerced, they are compromised, and they are complicit. They're not just hiding the truth from someone else. They're hiding the truth because their own guilt will be evidenced if the truth comes out. They are protecting themselves, not even a collaborator. They are protecting their own personal direct interest. And that is another crime in and of itself. Do you not see the snake eating its own tail here? Is that a principle that is so difficult to understand and a concept that is so complicated that America as a general collective group is obtuse and it's an opaque idea, a wall that they cannot see through? I mean, really, where is the objectivity of America on all of this? They're not objective. They're not objective because they don't want to see this administration brought down. They don't want to see this administration brought down because either it's going to personally affect them or politically and ideologically it will affect them. And I have never in my life, and I mean, you know, I've been watching politics for a pretty significant portion of my life. I've never seen a more polarized country or a more polarized electorate than we have today. We are divided and polarized on so many different levels. And by design, I might add, this is the Cloward and Piven strategy of divide and conquer, and divide and create and foment chaos so that, you know, there can be no organization, no collective approach. Because they got to keep us separate and fighting amongst ourselves, because if we ever actually all got together and put our own differences aside, and we put our heads together and our power and our energy and our effort and our money and our time together, my goodness, we would storm the castle with pitchforks and torches. I mean, really. And we'd storm the castle as black and white and gay and straight, and we'd storm the castle as men and women and Catholic and Christian and Protestant and Baptist and Muslim and Buddhist. That's what we'd do. We'd storm the castle irrespective of those differences, which really ultimately don't really separate us. They are the colors of the rainbow that make up America. So instead of recognizing those differences exist and allowing ourselves to coexist with them, they're being used as a wedge to separate us and drive us apart so that we as a collective organization, we the people, don't get together and say, enough is enough. And we know who you are, we know what you've done, and we will no longer tolerate it. It's sad, really, because what it shows us is that America is petty, easily misled, and it's reflective of the lack of intellectual honesty, intellectual curiosity, and the lack of integrity and honor that exists in our country today. Ethics, morals. I don't mean biblical morals. You don't even have to go to the Bible to know that stealing or hurting someone else is wrong. I mean, you don't need the Bible to tell you that. You don't need the Quran to tell you that. I mean, really. We don't need, any philosopher to tell us that. We learned that early on. We learned that early on when you took a toy away from your friend and he said, "That's not right, that's my toy." And you said, "I don't care, I'm keeping it." And you hurt his feelings, or you took it. I mean, look, these are just basic human rules of existence, like physics, like gravity. You drop a rock and it's going to hit the ground. Morals and ethics are not tied to some religious fervor or idealism. They're basic foundational functions of everything that we do. All right, we're going to break. I want you to find us on americasvoicenow.org. That's our website. We post up links and stories up there every day. We try to find stories of interest to you. If you're an author or a writer, by the way, I'd love to have your help. You can send me an email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. Please find us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. And last but certainly not least, find us on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, where we post hundreds of videos. You can find this and every other program that we do there at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes, and we're going to tackle our third topic, which is Chris Christie in his push to become the Republican nominee to run our country. We'll be right back.